My mother didn't even look at me when she said it. Everything goes to your sister. Her voice was calm and steady, like she had already said those words many times in her head before this moment. The lawyer's office felt too quiet after that. The air smelled like old paper and polished wood, and the ticking clock on the wall suddenly sounded louder than anything else. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't argue. I didn't react. I had learned a long time ago that reacting never changed anything. Beside me, my sister Claire shifted slightly in her seat. I didn't turn to look at her, but I could feel it. That quiet satisfaction. That small, hidden smile. The lawyer nodded slowly, as if this was expected. He glanced down at the document in front of him, then back up again. But instead of continuing, he paused. Something about that pause felt different. Heavy. He leaned forward slightly and looked directly at my mother. Before we proceed, he said carefully, I need to ask one question. For the first time since we sat down, my mother moved. It was small, almost nothing, but I noticed it. Her fingers tightened around her purse. And in that moment, I realized something wasn't right. If you looked at my life from the outside, you might think I didn't mind being overlooked. I was the quiet one in the family, the one who didn't argue or demand attention. I stayed out of the way, and over time, people just accepted that as who I was. Claire was the opposite. She had a way of filling every room she entered. She laughed loudly, spoke confidently, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. People admired her. My mother especially. Growing up, it was always clear where we stood. Claire was praised, celebrated, and protected. I was expected to understand, to adjust, to give way. I didn't hate her for it. I never did. I just learned to live around it. When my father became sick, things changed, or at least, I thought they would. At first, Claire visited often, bringing flowers and talking about her busy life. But as the weeks passed, her visits became shorter, then less frequent, until they almost stopped completely. I stayed. Every day, I took care of him. I made his meals, helped him sit up, and stayed by his side even when he couldn't speak. In those quiet moments, he would look at me for a long time, like he was trying to say something he couldn't put into words. And every time, I felt like there was something he wanted me to understand. The house felt different as my father's condition worsened. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The smell of medicine lingered in every room, mixed with the scent of food that was rarely eaten. I moved through each day carefully, keeping everything steady, even when nothing felt stable. My routine became simple: wake up early, check on him, prepare his meals, sit beside him, and listen to the silence. My mother, however, seemed distant. She stayed busy, but not with him. She spent hours on the phone in low voices, often stepping outside or closing doors behind her. When she returned, she acted like everything was normal, as if nothing was changing. Claire only came twice that month. The second time, she stood at the doorway and barely stepped inside. I can't stay long, she said, glancing at her phone. She didn't walk over to his bed or speak to him directly. It was as if she didn't want to see how much he had changed. I watched from the hallway, a quiet frustration building inside me. Before she left, she turned to my mother and asked softly, "Have you handled everything?" My mother nodded quickly. Too quickly. And in that brief moment, the look they shared made it clear, they knew something I didn't. A few days after that, someone new started coming to the house. He didn't look out of place, but he didn't belong either. He was older, neatly dressed, and always carried a slim leather folder under his arm. The first time I saw him, he stood near the front door speaking quietly with my mother. She sounded polite, but careful. Like she was choosing every word. When she noticed me, she paused for just a second before calling me over. "This is Mr. Carter," she said. "He's helping with a few things." He gave me a small nod, nothing more. But his eyes stayed on me a moment longer than expected. "Your father speaks highly of you," he said calmly. That caught me off guard. My father hadn't been able to say much at all. "I just take care of him," I replied. Mr. Carter studied me quietly, then glanced down at his folder. "That says more than you think," he said. After that, he began visiting often. Sometimes he spoke with my mother, sometimes he sat by my father's room, reviewing papers. And sometimes, he asked me simple questions, about the house, about my father, about how long I had been caring for him. Nothing felt strange at first. But over time, I realized something. He wasn't just visiting. He was watching. As the days passed, Claire started coming around more often. At first, it seemed like she was trying to make up for her absence. She brought groceries, spoke softly, even asked me once if I needed help. But something about it didn't feel genuine. It felt rehearsed, like she was playing a role she hadn't practiced enough. She spent more time with my mother than with our father. They would sit together in the kitchen, speaking in low voices, stopping every time I walked in. The conversations always ended too quickly, followed by forced smiles. One afternoon, I walked in earlier than expected and heard my name. "She won't question it," Claire was saying. My mother hushed her immediately, and when they saw me, both of them went quiet. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Nothing important," my mother replied too quickly. Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just small things. You don't need to worry." But I did worry. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like I was just being overlooked. It felt like I was being kept out. And that was different. That night, as I sat beside my father, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was already in motion, and I was the only one who didn't know what it was. That evening, my father seemed more restless than usual. He hadn't spoken clearly in days, but his eyes were sharp, alert in a way I hadn't seen for a while. When I sat beside him, he reached for my hand with surprising strength. "Dad?" I said softly. His lips moved, but no clear words came out. He tried again, his voice faint and broken, like something caught between thoughts and silence. I leaned closer, trying to understand. His fingers tightened around mine, and he turned his head slightly, as if looking toward the door. Then back at me. There was urgency in his eyes. He was trying to tell me something important. "Is it about the house?" I asked quietly. "Or the papers?" His breathing grew uneven. He nodded, just once, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Then he looked past me again, toward the hallway. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps. I turned my head slightly, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at him, his grip had weakened. His eyes softened again, the urgency fading. Whatever he had been trying to say, he hadn't been able to finish it. And somehow, I knew, that unfinished moment mattered more than anything else. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, though I couldn't explain why. The house was quiet, but not in the peaceful way I remembered. It felt tense, like something had already happened before the day even began. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed a faint light coming from my parents' room. The door was slightly open. I stepped closer, careful not to make a sound, and saw my mother standing near the dresser. Papers were spread out in front of her, and she was moving through them quickly, flipping pages, pausing, then placing them back into a neat stack. There was something urgent in the way she handled them, like she was trying to finish before being seen. But the floor creaked beneath me. She turned instantly. For a brief moment, her expression was sharp, almost startled, before it softened into something calmer. "Amara? You're up early." "I was just checking on Dad," I said quietly, glancing past her. She shifted slightly, just enough to block my view. "He's resting," she replied. "You should go make breakfast." I nodded, but my eyes stayed on the papers a second longer. I couldn't read them clearly, but I knew what they were. Legal documents. She followed my gaze and gathered them quickly, sliding everything into a folder. "It's nothing you need to worry about," she added. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was exactly something I should be worried about. Later that day, everything changed. There was no warning, no clear moment when it began. One minute, my father was lying still, breathing slowly, and the next, something felt wrong. The air in the room seemed heavier, like it was pressing down on everything. I called for my mother, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the fear in it. She came quickly, but when she stepped inside, she didn't look surprised. She looked ready. That was what unsettled me the most. Claire arrived not long after, though I hadn't called her. She walked and dressed neatly, her hair perfectly in place, like she had been expecting this moment. She didn't rush to the bed or speak to him. She stayed near the door, watching. I didn't understand it. I stayed by my father's side, holding his hand, speaking softly even when I didn't know if he could hear me. His breathing slowed, each breath weaker than the last. And then, it stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. I lowered my head, still holding his hand, trying to hold on to something that was already gone. Behind me, Claire exhaled quietly. And my mother said, in a calm, steady voice, "We'll handle everything from here." The days that followed passed in a blur, but not the kind that fades quickly. Every moment felt stretched, heavy with things I didn't fully understand. People came to the house, offering quiet condolences, speaking in soft voices, then leaving just as quietly. I moved through it all like I was watching from a distance. Keeping busy was the only thing that made sense. I cleaned, organized, and made sure everything was in place. It gave me something to hold on to. But while I was doing that, my mother had already taken control of everything else. She handled the calls, the paperwork, the arrangements. Nothing happened without her approval. Claire stayed close to her, following her lead, agreeing with every decision as if it had already been discussed. What troubled me most was how quickly everything was being finalized. It felt rushed. One evening, I walked into the living room and saw them sitting together, going through a stack of papers. The moment they noticed me, they stopped. "Is there something you need?" my mother asked. "I was just wondering about Dad's documents," I said carefully. "They're being handled," she replied without hesitation. Claire added, "You don't need to worry about that." The words were simple, but the meaning behind them wasn't. I stood there for a moment longer before turning away. Because for the first time, it didn't feel like I was being overlooked. It felt like I was being kept out on purpose. A few days later, I noticed something strange. My father's study was locked. It had never been locked before. That room was always open, even when he was too weak to sit at his desk. It was one of the few places in the house that still felt like him, quiet, steady, untouched by everything else. I stood in front of the door for a long moment, my hand hovering near the handle. Then I tried it. Locked. I frowned and looked down the hallway. The house was silent, but I still felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. Like even standing in front of that door was crossing a line that had been quietly drawn. Later that evening, I asked my mother about it. "Oh, that," she said casually, not even looking up. "There's nothing in there you need right now." "That's Dad's room," I replied. "His things are still inside." "They'll be sorted out," she said firmly. "You don't need to worry about it." Claire didn't say anything, but I noticed the way she avoided my eyes. That told me enough. Because it wasn't just about the room. It was about what was inside it. And why I wasn't allowed to see it. The next clue didn't come from inside the house. It came from outside. I was in the front yard that afternoon, clearing away some old boxes near the porch, when Mrs. Langley from next door walked over. She had known my father for years, long before we even moved into the neighborhood. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said softly, placing a hand on my arm. "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated, then looked back at the house for a moment before speaking again. "Your father was a good man," she said. "Very thoughtful." I nodded. "He was." She studied me for a second, like she was deciding whether to say something more. Then she did. "You know, he talked about you often," she said. "Said you were the only one he could really count on." I felt something tighten in my chest. "He did?" I asked quietly. She nodded. "Oh yes. He trusted you." The way she said it made it sound like more than just a compliment. Like it meant something deeper. Before I could ask anything else, she gave me a small smile and stepped back. "Take care of yourself, Amara," she said, then walked away. I stood there for a long time after she left. Because I couldn't stop thinking about those words. He trusted you. With what? That evening, I received a call. The number wasn't saved in my phone, but something about it made me answer anyway. "Amara?" the voice said. "Yes. This is Mr. Carter." I straightened slightly, surprised. "Oh, yes. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," he said. His tone was calm, measured, the same as before. "No, it's fine." There was a brief pause on the line, like he was choosing his next words carefully. "I wanted to let you know that we'll be holding the reading of your father's will soon," he said. "And it's important that you're present." I hesitated. I thought everything was already being handled. Another pause. Then, quietly, "Not everything." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. "I'll send you the details," he continued. "Just make sure you come." "I will," I said, though I wasn't sure why I suddenly felt nervous. After the call ended, I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. Not everything. Those words echoed in my mind. And for the first time since my father passed, I felt something shift. Like whatever had been hidden, was about to come into the open. The morning of the will reading arrived faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before, not because I was anxious about the outcome, but because something about the past few days didn't sit right with me. It felt like I was walking toward something I didn't fully understand yet. The house was quiet when I left, but not in the same heavy way as before. This time, it felt like everything was holding its breath. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, Claire was already there, sitting comfortably like she belonged. My mother sat beside her, composed and steady, as if this was just another step in something she had already planned. Neither of them seemed surprised to see me, but there was something in the way they looked at me, brief, distant, almost dismissive. Mr. Carter greeted me with a small nod, the same calm expression on his face. "I'm glad you came," he said, gesturing for me to sit. I took my place across from them, my hands resting quietly in my lap. No one spoke much after that. The room filled with a tense silence that seemed to stretch longer than it should. Then Mr. Carter opened the file in front of him. And just like that, everything began. Mr. Carter adjusted his glasses slightly and began reading. His voice was steady, clear, and careful, as though every word carried weight. He spoke about my father first, his life, his work, the things he had built. Listening to it felt strange, like hearing a version of him that existed outside the quiet moments I knew. Then the details started. Assets. Accounts. The house. Each word landed slowly, but I didn't react. I just listened. When he reached the final part, he paused briefly, then continued. All primary assets, including the family residence, are to be transferred to Claire Bennett. The words settled into the room like something final. I didn't move. Across from me, Claire exhaled softly, shifting slightly in her seat. My mother remained still, her expression unchanged, like this was exactly what she had expected to hear. No one looked at me right away. Maybe they were waiting. Waiting for a reaction, a question, something. But I didn't give them anything. Because deep down, something didn't feel complete. It felt like there was more. And then, just as the silence began to stretch, Mr. Carter didn't close the file. The room stayed quiet, but it was no longer the same kind of silence. This one felt different, like something was about to shift. Mr. Carter kept his hand resting on the document, his eyes still scanning the page as though he hadn't reached the end yet. I noticed it before anyone else seemed to. Claire leaned back slightly, relaxed now, her confidence returning. My mother sat with her hands folded neatly, her posture calm and controlled. To them, it was over. But to him, it wasn't. Slowly, he lifted his gaze from the paper and looked across the room. His eyes moved from Claire, to my mother, then briefly to me. There was a pause. Not accidental but intentional. Before we proceed, he said carefully, his voice lower now, there's something I need to clarify. My mother's fingers tightened slightly in her lap, though her face didn't change. Claire frowned faintly, her earlier ease fading just a little. Mr. Carter adjusted the document, turning a single page with deliberate care. I just need to confirm one detail, he continued. And in that moment, I felt it clearly. Whatever came next was not part of their plan. The air in the room felt tighter now, like the space itself had narrowed. No one spoke. Even Claire, who had been so relaxed just moments ago, sat a little straighter, her attention fully on Mr. Carter. He didn't rush. He let the silence sit for a moment longer, as if giving the weight of what he was about to say time to settle. Then he looked directly at my mother. Before this document was finalized, he said calmly, "Did you review every section of the will, including the final clause?" The question sounded simple. Almost harmless. But the effect it had was immediate. My mother blinked once, then again, as if she needed a second to process what he had just asked. Her posture shifted slightly, her shoulders tightening in a way I had never seen before. "Of course," she said, though her voice wasn't as steady as it had been earlier. Everything was reviewed. Mr. Carter didn't respond right away. He simply held her gaze for a moment, then glanced back down at the document. Claire frowned, looking between them. "What clause?" she asked. No one answered her. And for the first time since this began, I felt something change. Not in the room, but in the balance of it. Mr. Carter turned another page slowly, his movements precise, almost deliberate. It was clear now that he was not following the flow my mother and Claire had expected. Whatever was written there had not been part of their confidence earlier. "There is a section here," he said, his voice even, "that requires clarification before any transfer can be completed." My mother shifted in her seat again, this time more noticeably. "I don't see why that's necessary," she replied, her tone firmer now, almost defensive. The will was already agreed upon. "Agreed upon," Mr. Carter repeated calmly, but not fully acknowledged. Claire leaned forward slightly. "Can you just explain what you mean?" she asked, a hint of impatience creeping into her voice. Mr. Carter finally looked up again, his expression unchanged. The final clause outlines a condition tied to the distribution of the estate, he said. The word condition seemed to hang in the air. My mother's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. I watched her carefully. Because now, for the first time, she didn't look certain. And that alone told me everything I needed to know. The room felt completely still as Mr. Carter adjusted the document in front of him. No one interrupted him now. Even Claire, who had been pushing for answers, sat quietly, her earlier confidence fading into something closer to unease. This clause, he continued, was added under your father's direct instruction in the final revision of the will. My heart skipped slightly at that. Final revision. That meant my father had made a deliberate choice. When a condition is attached to an inheritance, Mr. Carter went on, it must be acknowledged by all parties involved before the distribution can proceed. My mother shook her head slightly. I don't remember any condition, she said, but this time her voice lacked its earlier control. That is precisely the issue, he replied. Claire turned toward her. Mom, what is he talking about? My mother didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the document, as if trying to recognize something she hadn't noticed before. Mr. Carter placed his hand gently on the page. For clarity, he said, I will now read the clause in full. I felt my breath slow as I leaned back slightly in my chair. Because whatever he was about to read was the reason everything suddenly felt different. And I knew this was where the truth began. Mr. Carter lowered his eyes to the document and began to read, his voice steady but slower now, as if each word mattered more than the last. In the event that any party attempts to alter, conceal, or misrepresent the contents of this will, all designated transfers shall be suspended pending full review. The words settled into the room like something heavy. For a moment, no one spoke. Claire blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. What does that even mean? She asked, her voice sharper now. It means, Mr. Carter replied calmly, lifting his gaze, that if there has been any interference with the integrity of this document, the distribution cannot proceed as stated. My mother shook her head quickly. There hasn't been any interference, she said, but there was a tightness in her voice that hadn't been there before. Everything was handled properly. Mr. Carter studied her quietly, then placed his hand over a specific section of the document. That would be consistent, he said, if the document in question had not been modified after its final signing. The room went still again. I felt it then, clear and undeniable. Something had been changed. And whatever it was, they hadn't expected it to come back to them. Claire turned sharply toward my mother, her confusion now mixed with something closer to alarm. Modified? She repeated. What is he talking about? My mother didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the document, as if she was trying to read it from across the table without actually touching it. That's not possible, she said finally, though the certainty in her voice was fading. The paperwork was finalized. Mr. Carter gave a small, measured nod. Yes, he said. The original document was finalized and signed under proper legal supervision. Then what's the issue? Claire asked. The issue, he replied, is that the version presented here today is not identical to the original document. The words hit harder than anything else so far. Claire's face changed instantly. What do you mean it's not the same? She asked. Mr. Carter opened his folder and carefully removed another document. This one looked older, more worn at the edges. This, he said, placing it beside the first, is the original copy. My mother's hand tightened against her purse again. Because now, there was no avoiding it. There were two versions. And only one of them was real. The difference between the two documents wasn't obvious at first glance, but Mr. Carter didn't leave it to interpretation. He adjusted them side by side and pointed to a section near the end. This is where the alteration occurs, he said. Claire leaned forward, her eyes scanning the pages quickly. I don't see anything wrong, she said, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. That's because the modification is subtle, Mr. Carter replied. A single section was removed and replaced. My mother finally spoke, her tone sharper now, almost defensive. Are you accusing someone of something? She asked. I'm stating a fact, he said calmly. This version omits the clause that places a condition on the inheritance. The room fell silent again. I watched my mother closely. This time, she didn't deny it immediately. That hesitation told me everything. Claire looked at her, her expression shifting from confusion to realization. Mom, what is he talking about? She asked again, but this time her voice was quieter. Still, there was no answer. Because the truth was already there, sitting between them on the table. And for the first time since this began, their certainty was gone. The silence in the room felt heavier than anything that had come before it. No one moved for a few seconds, as if the truth sitting on the table needed time to be understood. Mr. Carter gently placed his hand on the original document. The clause that was removed, he said, was not minor. It directly affected the outcome of this will. Claire's eyes moved quickly between the two papers, her breathing slightly uneven now. Then what does it say? She asked. Mr. Carter looked at her briefly, then back down at the page. It states that the inheritance is conditional, he said. Specifically, that it cannot be transferred to any individual who has not demonstrated consistent care, responsibility, and direct involvement in your father's well-being during his final years. The words landed clearly. There was no confusion in them. Claire leaned back slowly, as if the meaning had taken the strength out of her posture. That doesn't make sense, she said quietly. But it did. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, everything that had felt unclear was beginning to align. My mother's face had changed completely now. The calm control she carried earlier was gone, replaced by something I had never seen in her before. Uncertainty. And maybe, regret. Mr. Carter lifted the original document slightly and turned it toward us, making sure there was no doubt about what was written. This clause was added personally by your father, he said. It was reviewed and confirmed in the presence of legal witnesses. Claire stared at the page, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and realization. So what does that mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It means, Mr. Carter replied, that the inheritance cannot legally be transferred based on the altered version presented earlier. My mother finally spoke, though her voice sounded weaker than before. There must be some mistake, she said. We followed everything exactly. Mr. Carter met her gaze calmly. The original document has been verified, he said. And the removal of this clause constitutes a breach of its legal integrity. The words were clear, leaving no space for interpretation. Claire looked at my mother again, but this time her expression held something new. Not confidence. Not control but doubt. And in that moment, the entire situation shifted. Because what they had believed was settled, was no longer theirs to hold. Mr. Carter carefully set both documents down and straightened slightly in his chair. Given the circumstances, he said, the estate cannot be distributed under the altered terms. No one interrupted him now. No one questioned him. Because there was nothing left to question. Claire sat still, her hands resting in her lap, her earlier certainty completely gone. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of what she had just learned had settled heavily on her. My mother didn't speak at all. She stared at the table, her expression distant, as if she was trying to understand how everything had slipped out of her control. And I sat there quietly, just as I had from the beginning. The difference now was that the silence felt different. It wasn't filled with tension anymore. It was filled with truth. Mr. Carter turned his attention to me for the first time since the reading began. His expression softened slightly, though his voice remained steady. There is one final document to be acknowledged, he said. My breath slowed. Because I already knew, this wasn't over yet. And whatever came next, was meant for me. Mr. Carter opened the final document with the same careful attention he had shown from the start. This time, there was no hesitation in the room. No one spoke. No one interrupted. Everyone simply waited. This is the original and complete version of your father's will, he said, his voice calm but firm. It includes all clauses and final instructions as intended. He paused briefly, then continued. Under these terms, the estate is to be transferred to Amara Bennett. The words settled quietly, but their impact was immediate. I didn't react right away. I didn't feel the need to. Everything that had been unclear, everything that had felt distant and hidden, now made sense in a way I hadn't expected. My father had seen me. Not just in the small, quiet moments, but fully. Claire lowered her gaze, her silence speaking louder than anything she could have said. My mother remained still, her earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by something softer, something quieter. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the need to prove anything. Because I never had to. As I stood to leave, Mr. Carter spoke one last time. He trusted you, he said. I nodded once. And for the first time since everything began, I understood why.